Happy Friday, everybody. How's it going?
Hello, hello.
Hey,
Hello, hello. Awesome. How's you guys' Friday going?
It is it's going very well.
It's beer o'clock.
Cheer-
Nice.
afternoon
Nice,
beverages
dude.
over here.
We're
and
coffee
we,
Data.World
we,
HQ,
so-
we got our some backup too here.
Nice. What kind of beers are those?
I'm having Carback. This is a Texas beer.
and some Austin Beer Works Peacemaker Ale.
Mm.
In the back here's another Austin Beer Works Fire Eagle American IPA, and we have Live Oak Hefeweizen, another
Yeah, so
Austin beer. So
Texas
Can we
beer.
get that out here? I'm gonna have to check the
No.
state liquor store to see if we have it. So,
Yeah, awesome.
maybe?
Carback is that's a big one now.
Yeah.
That's but the other ones I don't know. I don't think so.
Interesting.
local.
Well, it's Friday, so what better thing to do than have a drink of your choice and talk about data? So for people who don't know who you are, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah.
I guess I'll go first. Hey, excited to be on the show, Joe and Matt. I'm Tim Gasper, VP of Product over at Data.World. Also co-host with Juan at Catalog and Cocktails. We're just about to launch season 4, so very excited about that. That's happening next week at the Gartner
Nice.
Data and Analytics Conference. So we've been doing that for a couple of years now. I've been in the data and analytics space as a product manager for 15 years or something like that. So just in general,
Dang.
done this, done that, tried a bunch of things, failed at a bunch of things. So excited to chat about that.
Yeah, and I'm Juan Sequeda. I'm the principal scientist here at Data.World, and again with Tim, do the Catalog and Cocktails podcast. I have an academic background, so I've been around in this data and knowledge and data integration space like for 15 plus years. I did my undergrad, my PhD at UT Austin in computer science, and so I've done. I still continue to do academia. I still have PhD students and do research, but I like to kind of bridge a lot the research and what's going on in the real world, observe those problems, bring them into research, and then kind of cycle them back. And that's a lot of stuff I get to do here at Data.World too.
Industry and academia.
Bring those things together, and then so I've done. I joined Data.World because I did my previous company was a spin out from our research, and then sold it to Data.World, and that's why I'm here, and we're just having a lot of fun on all this data and knowledge and catalogs, and that's my life. That's what I love to do.
That's pretty cool. Matt's an academic too.
Yeah. So my PhD is slightly less useful, at least in a direct way. Mine is in pure math, so I don't have students or anything like that these days. But it's fun. There's a bit of crossover going on. Like we're working on a course right now with the university on data engineering and trying to cross over in like very pragmatic approaches to data, which I think even in computer science sometimes get lost. So it's refreshing to hear this perspective of like trying to sort of raise a new generation of PhD students, but focusing on practical problems and not just abstraction.
Well, I actually I've been getting more involved with theoretical folks, so database theory folks, because they're like, I'm like, you're studying this very theoretical problem, but and you make all these assumptions, but why did you make those assumptions? Well, for whatever reason. Like, if you would have changed that assumption to this other one, that's actually connected to something we observe in the real world. How about that? And like, well, that makes the problem much more harder. Well, good. Go work on that problem, because then we actually connect to some stuff, right? And then, so that's a lot of the things that I like to go talk to academics and find some really smart students to go work on hard problems that are connected to the real world, and we can bring that back.
And a lot of it, we actually, Joe and I have been on an AMA for the Data Talk Club, like the Slack channel, and we're discussing like the feedback loop between academia and industry, and there definitely is one, right? But sometimes it just doesn't move fast enough, and so I think part of that is just having more conversations and like more direct exchange of ideas, so that maybe industry people kind of know what might be coming down the pipe in terms of theory, and then academics get informed about what the hard problems actually are, which sometimes gets lost in the discussion.
Well, yeah, I think some of the comments were that they were teaching still whatever big data was, like Hadoop in some of their classes, and I think it's maybe good for a historical reference, but it's, you know, it might seem controversial, but it's, to me, it's kind of like learning Latin in this day and age. It's like
that's a good one. Learning Hadoop today is like learning Latin.
Well, there's
I mean,
even
it's still some utility if you want to go to med school, but, but no, all the Hadoop people will be throwing.
It's crazy how fast the tech trends change, right?
Oh,
because academia finally updates the curriculum, and the rest of the world is like, oh, just kidding. We're on to Spark and and DuckDB and things like that. And it's like, oh wait, maybe in 10 years that's going to be on the on the curriculum? How do we get that closer? Right? How do we keep it?
Change is super fast, but that's one of the things we're trying to balance is, even though the course in some ways is going to be based on our book, which is technology agnostic, there's still probably a lot of trends that are happening that are not even technology trends per se. They're just practice trends that we'll need to talk about in about a year, right? Like, I think some of the stuff that you guys are talking about with knowledge, for example, is something that it's more of a pendulum swing. Like, this is probably, these are discussions that have occurred before, then sort of went away, and now they're, it's like the one of the episodes, I don't know, the seasons of like a show or something. It's back, and so here we are again. And that's what we want to talk about too, among probably a lot of other things. I mean, when Juan and I first met, we could probably that should have been a podcast episode, to be frank. Like, it was good. We probably could talk for hours, but knowledge is one of these things that I see you guys talking about a lot right now. What's up with knowledge?
Well, so I always say we live in this data first world. So if you've been following what I post on LinkedIn, I talk about this knowledge first world. Where that comes from is that we live in this data first world, which means I need more data. Give me more data. Give me more data. Data and technology, data. I'm like, okay, hold on. So you're telling me that you can't solve the problem because you lack data. And if you get more data, you can solve the problem? Call BS on that. And I think that because that's, again, it's just like doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results, right? The Einstein's definition of insanity. So something needs to change. And that change right there is on the knowledge side. And that knowledge, for me, is like something we've been discussing. We actually were like last year, we took a weekend trip into the middle of Texas to go drink beer and whiskey and go just brainstorm stuff. We came up with this idea of like, you have this knowledge first world, which is people first, context first, and relationships first. So you have data, but go talk to the people to understand what exactly they want, and what department do they work in gives you the context of how they're seeing the world, and all these things are connected because the people work together. Their departments pass systems and data from one system to another. So from the knowledge perspective, it's what we've always been doing, but we kind of forgotten about it. A lot of the data modeling, right?
Mm-hmm. In a data first world, you're always kind of putting the focus on the object of the data that you're collecting. And it's all about that object, whether it's an event or a particular row in the database or whatever it's going to be, right? But if you put knowledge first, then the context is actually the most important thing. And like, how are people using it? What are they doing with it? What is the knowledge that lives in people's heads? And thinking about how we actually embed that, use technology to actually embed that and make that something that we can foster and grow.
Oh, sorry, 1 second here.
No, so if you think at when people ask, so what does that mean? Like, that's the knowledge part that we need to understand. So for example, to go ask somebody, how does a business work? And have them go draw it on the whiteboard. You do bubbles and lines around that stuff, right? So then you go ask somebody else, how does the business, how do you see the business? And they're going to draw bubbles and line around that stuff. Compare them, right? Are they the same? Are they different? I'm sure there are going to be parts that are going to be the same, parts that are going to be different, and those differences are going to be the different context. And that's how you understand how your business works. That's the knowledge part. And what we need to go do is connect that with the data, which is the raw facts that have come into the systems because somebody clicked and bought something or whatever, right? Those are the raw facts. And we need to start connecting these things. And those connections are, this is the principles. We've been doing this over and over again. They're rules, they're transformations, right? Everybody loves DBT. Yeah. DBT, T are transforms, they're queries. Queries are rules. Rules are views. Views are, all this stuff is the same thing. We've been doing this since the beginning of kind of modern data management. I mean, not modern. I mean, like just data management since
in general
since the 70s.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and I think, Joe and I both come from a data science background, and one of the things we would commonly see, and probably applied to us once in a while too, is that the data scientists didn't actually know how the business made money. And that's a significant problem, right? It's like you're trying to solve this, like, I'm going to give you a magical model that's going to make your business better. Okay, but how do you actually make money? Like, how does this business work?
I thought the predictive model. What are you predicting?
Well, yeah, and I think it's funny because you talk to even software engineers too, or I guess anyone that touches data or creates data, and software engineers create data in a lot of cases. But I think some pushback I get from engineers. No matter what prefix you have for your engineering title, is well, why do I need to talk to the business? That's somebody else's job, right? And so, I mean, what do you guys? How do you respond to that kind of attitude? Where, yeah, I mean, that's nice, but that's not really my role. I'm here to engineer stuff, not to talk to people.
I have a take. I don't know.
I think we both have a very similar take on this, which is the sort of the importance of what people kind of call the soft skills in addition to hard skills. But I think we both think that's kind of the wrong terminology, because they're both critical, and the soft skill kind of terminology makes it sound like it's less important or optional or something like that. But like data engineers, data scientists, analysts, folks that are working with the data, it is critical that you be able to understand the business, and those that have an understanding of the business and maybe have medium technical capabilities are actually going to probably be more successful than people who have high technical ability but low business acumen. And so, Juan, you've been talking lately, right, about like business literacy being really important, not just data literacy.
So honest, no BS, be very blunt around this stuff. If you are a data tech person and you want to have a successful career and grow and make a lot of money, but you do not want to go understand the business, you're set up for failure. You will not do that. You will not succeed if that's your goal. Or there, if you just want to sit in the corner and code and do that stuff, then yeah, don't go. I mean, by the way, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? But if that's what you want to go do, then understand that. But that you're not going. Your possibilities are much more limited. And if that's what you're blunt and honest, I'm actually curious. People will disagree with me on that. I think what we're missing, the opportunity here, is folks who can be the bridge. And I've had this is, I think, the fourth conversation I had today about this on the bridge. And yeah, they're unicorns. Yeah, you know what? Maybe they are, but they don't have to be unicorns anymore. I think it's just literally needs to be more incentives to be able to go understand where the business is, and there needs to be more education around this stuff too. I mean, I talked about this all the time. Why don't we have data modeling anymore? You can get a master's in data, and you can get a master's in data science, and there's no data modeling course involved.
Oh yeah,
you get a 4-year degree in computer science, and assuming you took a database course, you probably had 1, max 2 lectures that had data modeling in 4 years of a computer scientist. That is ridiculous. So this is the change that needs to happen. So at the end of the day, if you really want to go succeed in having a successful career, understand how the business works. Go read Wall Street Journal. I tell people to.
It's a good journal, by the way. You should read it anyway. Chris Tab. Hey, Chris, what's up? He says you can build the fastest pipeline in the world, but if it does not solve what the customer needs, you have failed. Yeah. I think it's a hard agree on that one.
Yeah.
So
I would like to say is that we define success from a technical perspective. So, here's $1 million and we built your data lake and all that stuff. It's all there and you pay and you're done. Woohoo! Yeah, but if I can't answer your questions, like, I don't care. There's a bunch of data in there. I'm not solving my problem. So if you look at success from a technical perspective, yeah, you're done. But you look at it from a social perspective, you're not successful yet.
Well, I kind of wonder too. I mean, you always see these old tropes about how like 85% or whatever, 80-ish% number, like of data projects fail, right? And it always, we've all been around the block. I wonder how much of it really does come down to, not understanding the context, for example, right? Like, I mean, data these days is fairly easy to acquire, right? I'll argue, at least as a raw ingredient. Whether or not it's useful is a different story. But I would say there's, there's a glut of data, but of useful, actionable results from that data are, still. The funny thing is, I mean, I've been in this space for a while, and the same types of questions I remember that I heard when I was getting started out are the same types of questions people are still asking. Like, can I trust this data? Or like, what are you trying to tell me? Right? That's something I hear often. Or what is this supposed to mean? Right? So.
Yeah, we're facing the same problems that we've been facing 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 25 years ago,
100,000 years ago.
100,000 years ago. Well, and to your point about technology and like how many projects of these 8% that are failing because the technology cannot is incapable of handling the amount of bits and bytes we've got very high performance streaming technology. We've got massive scale, databases. We've got Hadoop and Spark, and we've got GPUs if you want to do massive scale training and things like that, right? So it's not the technology that's the missing piece here. It's something else.
That's something else is the people aspect. That's something else is understanding what people are trying to go do. Just define what success means. So Data.World, we're an enterprise data catalog. And I'll publicly say this and hopefully, okay, we'll see. I dislike the word data catalog because it's much more than cataloging data. And from a marketing perspective, it doesn't sound that nice, but I think it should be called a data and knowledge catalog, because I need to go start cataloging what the knowledge. And what I mean by that is start cataloging the questions that you have, your success criteria, catalog the people, how they're related. Like you should, within an organization, you should have inside your data catalog, whatever, you should have not just all the tables and columns of their data systems in there, but have your entire organization, the team structures, how they work, understand what are the questions, what are their objectives, and all this stuff needs to get connected. So here's this dashboard that exists that is being used to answer these types of questions that these people are asking for them, right? And then you bring this all together. I mean, at the end of the day, I saw Ole is here on the chat. I mean, I've been chatting so much with Ole. He has a fantastic also Riley data catalog book coming out, and we were talking it's more than the data catalog. He agrees with me on that one. It should be more. We're putting these names. Is it the enterprise catalog, the memory catalog, whatever? So, anyways, point is that it's much more than just the data, the facts that are in there. We really need to start cataloging the people and the questions people have, because that's kind of that's the essence of why the business exists.
Yeah. I like Adam's comment here. He said actionable knowledge, right? It's about how do you go from data catalog to actionable knowledge?
Yeah, it's spot on. I mean, I kind of think of data cataloging as like basically, to make a supply chain equivalency, like your inventory table or something like that, or a product list or something. It's like, it's nice, but on its own, it's pretty inert. If you look at a warehouse, like an actual warehouse, for example, right? Inventory sits there because it's supposed to be used for something else, like a sale. It's an asset that sits there. And actually it's an asset that works against you if it isn't moving, because it's idle space, right? That's taken up, right? And so the data equivalent is, how's it being used? Is there an equivalent of like an order for this piece of data? And if there's not, like, why do you have it?
It's almost like data marketing in some sense, right? I mean, people complain about marketing. It seems distasteful, especially to academic types. But marketing is what gets products into people's hands. And if you have a really useful product to sell, then I appreciate you marketing to me to say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this e-bike or whatever it is. And I'm like, oh, that's actually really cool now that I investigate it. It's like we need to do the same thing with data. Say, here's all this data, but go to the business and say, why don't we talk about how you can
do you respond to those voice calls that ask you about your car warranty?
I do not.
Okay,
It's the wrong kind of marketing.
I like the comment about marketing.
Sometimes
I like the comment about marketing, because I think that it is like, how do you like communicate the value of data and help people understand like what it is, why it's valuable. Like, I think the supply chain analogy is an interesting one, because like, if you're doing a good job with your data, you're not just like inventorying for the sake of inventorying. You're actually trying to build some kind of like a just-in-time approach where you're like, okay, what's the least amount of work that we can do to get the most value out of our data or the assets that you have? And not just like, what is the point of the supply chain? The point of the supply chain is to feed the retail experience and the marketplace, like of where people go to buy the goods and the exchanging of services, right? So there's the whole marketplace aspect of this, which I think, nowadays you hear people throwing around this phrase now, data products, and this idea of data products becoming really popular now. I think that's really the right direction of all of this, because it's getting us to think about more like, well, what is a data product? What, like, a product has some kind of intrinsic meaning. It has a user of some kind. It has some kind of a use case. I think that's the right way to think about this in terms of like data value.
And that was one of the, one of the days that we were just sitting down and drinking and brainstorming. We were like, everybody's talking about data products and what does this stuff mean and so forth. So we posted about this whole ABC framework. And this is something I've actually been asking people to get more feedback to see if I want people agree, disagree, what's missing. So we call it the ABCs of data products: accountability, boundaries, contracts and expectations, downstream consumers, and explicit knowledge. And so, I mean, we bring product thinking to software. We bring product thinking to things like this water bottle by Yeti was created because they really understood who consumer for this can be, right? What is the design around this stuff? How they're going to go market that stuff. And we should do that same for data. And I mean, we talked about marketing, like the data, the products that we're generating for data, they should be used. You should have ambassadors. I like this. So Laura Madsen has this great book called Disrupting Data Governance. And she talks about data ambassadors, and they're the ones who need to be promoting the data. So if like, I'm going to generate data products, like I should be, how am I being successful? A measure of success is, hey, is this data product one being used by the people who asked me for it? And are other people using it too? Am I getting new feature requests to expand on that? Like that's how I would measure success around that. And I think we're just starting to kind of get into that mindset.
Well, it's funny how many of the ideas of data are just, I think, borrowed from areas like supply chain's a really big one. Like if you look at like the adoption of lean and how that inspired things like agile and DevOps and now data ops and other ops, it's pretty clear because like I think lean really hits on the head a lot of these changes. That we should be talking about, right? Like treating everything as a product. Like that's an idea from lean, like orienting things around consumer needs and product oriented thinking and reducing waste. So like everything should be on a flow, right? Like inventory is actually a really bad idea. As Tim points out, just in time. And it's, I think a lot of these concepts like X as a product, right? Like that's literally like the essence of lean, is thinking of things along product lines, not along department lines. Like we're so used to thinking marketing's over here, sales is over here, finance is over here, silos, right? Like you get rid of those things and like treat every deliverable as a product and move fast. It's not like you have to, monolithically say, okay, so here's our data product and this is like the only data product you'll ever get. So anything that I think moves it in this direction is definitely welcome. Because right now it definitely seems like it's still very batch and queue oriented, to borrow another phrase from the supply chain, right? Where everything is just sort of like batched together, queued up, sent down the stream, and or in a lot of cases just lobbed over the next wall to whatever silo happens to receive it. And I think that's a big reason why things don't get adopted, is because a lot of the stakeholders that should be involved, like why aren't you getting sales and marketing involved in your data products? Why aren't you getting everybody involved who touches this? We're doing it absolutely wrong, I think.
One of the, like in an organization, I think one of the departments who touches a lot of the data or should be touching a lot of the data is, for example, the marketing team.
For sure.
Right? Mm-hmm. How to start, like actually go talk to the marketing team and how they're looking about the data. And then, and this is part of the business literacy, right? So how does data and money flow and the systems around it, right? So we need to get customers, right? We have something we're selling to get customers. So we're going to have marketing go spend money. They're going to spend money on ads, generate campaigns. Where are they're going to go spend that? I don't know, on LinkedIn, Google ads. All right. So there's money spent there. And that's going to generate some data. Okay, who clicked on this thing and so forth. Right. And that's going to generate what? Leads. And those leads have a different types of leads, right? Is this a sales qualified lead, a marketing qualified, MQL and SQL? Like this is stuff we need to be learning. Do you have a special type of lead that you call? What is the different pipelines and stuff? So if it goes into the marketing pipeline, and they have software to go deal with that stuff too, right? They have software. So Google Analytics will have some things, and LinkedIn will have some other. So there's data coming from there you need to go integrate. Then there's data from all the marketing things, any MarTech tools, and then that goes into, it's a lead. It goes into the sales funnel. And there's a different pipeline over there. And then you have another tool, a CRM, a Salesforce, a HubSpot, whatever. And those go through a bunch of other things in there too. And eventually you go make the sale, you bring in a customer. And where does that go in? That data ends up into a Gain site or some other customer management system over you go use. And then they have all these things. And then you want to go upsell and just go like right there by describing it. there's all this knowledge. So when we talk about, what is a user? What is a customer? It's like, well, there's so many different, from a marketing perspective, from a sales perspective, from a CS perspective, how does that data flow? The context and relationships. Well, this data just came in from this other pipeline, this other flow from marketing to sales. Like there's a difference. That's why we have a mismatch. That's why it's complicated and so forth. So we need, and then if we understand that flow, we understand who are the people involved in that and what are the systems involved in that, the different tools. Like this is stuff that every data person in an organization should learn. And if you don't learn that, then you're literally, I would say you're running around like a chicken with their heads cut off. And I think if you want to be successful, go understand how the business works. And that's what I call business literacy.
Yeah, it's funny. This is one of the most frequent disconnects I see. And often what happens is the marketing side just ends up trying to put together its own data without the technical skills to do so. And then you have in parallel the data org, the technical side, trying to do stuff that marketing doesn't consume. And it's just like a massive waste of resources.
Yeah, but why does the marketing department do that?
No, exactly.
They feel like the data team's moving too slow. Or
they're just not, or they don't even pay attention to
They don't pay attention, right?
Yeah,
but I mean, it's like you hired this data team and they're not helping me out, so I'll just do it myself. And whether or not I know how to do it's a different story. But the intent's there, right? And so, but if the data team was aligned with, let's talk about that for a bit. I mean, how would you two organize data teams so they're effective for an organization?
I think that's a great question. I think obviously it depends a lot on the size of your organization and how much data talent and things you have. But I feel like there's a really good framework and vocabulary starting to come around that now with some of this concept around data mesh. Like whether you like that term or not, right? There's some core principles around like, I got to balance centralization and decentralization, right? That makes a ton of sense. So I think that when you look at like that example you gave of like, you've got the marketing department, they've got certain use cases around data. Usually you've got some kind of a centralized group, whether it's the data team or the IT team or however you think of that. They've got some of the data talent. Usually they've got the most of the data talent. And you might have a few analysts on the marketing side. How do we make sure that these folks are working well together? Where you're depending on that centralized group to help kind of manage the warehouse, kind of be the governors of some of the common data model around things. And then the marketing team, as they're self-serving, as they're kind of using some of that data, that they may have some embedded analysts that are working with that information. And then as you want to like take that knowledge that's being produced from that decentralized team, the marketing team, you want to be able to then bring that back into the centralized team. So I think, when you think about this model, sort of this hub and spoke model or data mesh model, or however you want to kind of describe it, whatever words you prefer, that feels like a scalable model that like when a company is smaller, okay, more things are centralized, right? When the company gets bigger, things get a little more decentralized and the centralized team is a little bit more of an enabler. It's more of a governance function. It's more of a collaboration function,
And I think this evolves, right? Because if you're starting small, then obviously it has to be centralized, right? And you start growing. We had this great conversation with the CTO of the Zebra, Mitish, and he was on our podcast. And something I remember today. This was like a year and a half ago. The laws, the 3s and 10s. So if you have 3 and 10s, things change. 3 people company, 10, 30. 100, 300, 1,000. Like those are moments where things are going to start changing. So that's an interesting experience. Like what is a data team going to be at the stage of 10 people? You probably don't even have one, right? Or everybody's doing it. 30 people, I don't know, 100, that's going to go straight. 300, those are good moments to start thinking about how things are going to start changing. So you obviously have some stuff that needs to be centralized. And I think within what needs to be centralized, there are aspects that you need to understand. I think it's like almost like a regulatory part, if you're big enough to go do that, or understand what is the business value of what needs to be centralized. So if a big company need to do GDPR and PII and all that stuff, then you need to go define that from a central point of view, because otherwise you're going to get fined and fine millions of dollars or whatever, right? So you need to have a central team around these things. And there are other concepts that you need to understand that need to be centralized because the business mandates it, and there's reasons for it. What is our definition of a customer? I chatted once with we had on the podcast, Kieran, who's the CPO of the Chief Product Officer of Matillion. Matillion has a definition for customer. It's a user who has been on the platform for 36 days. Not 35, not 37, 36, not 1, not 30. They have a reason behind that stuff. They centrally define that. There's reason why they did that, and everybody goes off and uses that.
So when somebody says customer, everybody knows.
Everybody knows what it is, right?
Yeah.
If you're going to go create a new application, whatever has customer, you know what it is, and everybody knows they can go trust that. That was well defined. So you need to have a central team around these things, right? And then what you really want, I think, I talked to the folks at Indeed, right? We had anyway, they had this like fixed, extensible model. Anyways, you go use it. It's defined. You just go use it as is. Here's the definition of telephone number. You just go use the definition of telephone number. Here's the schema. Here's what you expect about it.
So that's the fixed.
That's a fixed thing.
Yeah.
And then extensible. Oh, I need to extend it to have a special type of phone number for whatever. Okay, you use that fixed one, and then you go extend it and go make it explicit. And then maybe it's like customizable. There's a new thing, a new concept, something else that hasn't been done. All right, go do it on your own. Go make that. You customize your own new concept, whatever you need to go do, and you go represent that. Now, hey, guess what? Maybe some other domain is going to start coming up with something very similar. And I think this is kind of the mind shift. Like, oh, we need to control. We need to make sure that everything is everything is being organized together. It's like, no, I think this is the shift. It's like, hey, the world is complex. Why do we think we need to organize the world and make it all fixed into? No, let's embrace that complexity. So if things are mismatching, then that's fine. Let's identify where that friction is. And guess what? That's probably good. That's good energy that's going on. Let's go talk to these people. If nobody's complaining about this other stuff, then either it works perfectly or nobody's using it. So I'm glad we're not wasting our time on it.
That's really interesting. When you talk about a knowledge first world as well, I think what comes to mind is, there are circumstances where knowledge is very additive or multiplicative. So knowledge shouldn't be a zero-sum game, right? Where it's just because like there's one idea, it doesn't cancel out the other idea. In certain circumstances, happens, of course. But how do you feel about this idea where knowledge can actually, be a force multiplier and make organizations improve, its overall health?
So I think it goes back to one of the things I was, let's go catalog questions. So we need to understand how the business works, and everybody has people have different understanding, and what is even the different context that people have. I think we kind of take that for granted. The kind of the philosophical point of view is like knowledge is the immaterial, right? It's the language. I can't touch knowledge, but data is like the material. It's the physical bits, right? The matter, right? It's the data. They're the bits. I can see it on the screen right there. I can see 42. But what does 42 mean? Okay, I know it's a number. It's a natural number, positive natural number. But what else does it mean? I have to go look around it. Oh, there's a column called price. There's a word called USD next to it. On top of that means currency. Oh, okay. Then so there's this other knowledge around that gives me that context. And that's what I need to understand what that stuff means, and to understand what the business and how I can make decisions about this. I mean, it's meaning. I mean, that's why we learn things.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I might add to what you're saying is a little bit taking it in a related direction, but that's that I feel like knowledge is the greatest untapped resource within organizations right now. Like we've spent so much time and attention focused on the data aspect. And so we had the big data movement. We had the deep learning and AI kind of movements, right? We've got growing numbers of data engineers and things like that working with the data. But then somebody asked like, well, how many customers do we have? And it's like, well, let's I don't know, like, let's go look in the BI tool and, there's 10 different numbers. And, like the thing that often doesn't get mentioned is like the company intranet, the wiki, the emails, Slack, Teams, right? The amount of chat that's happening there, the knowledge that's in all these things is not 10 times as plentiful necessarily, although some companies it may be than, just your raw data, but it's 10, 100, 1,000, 1,000,000 times as contextually dense.
Yeah.
But how are we tapping into that? How are we leveraging that?
But so now to bring it back to kind of what the audience would probably care about, we're going too much philosophical and talk about Slacks and stuff like that. Is let's go look, for example, at SQL queries that generate your reports, at the stored procedures that you go have, right? Everybody loves data lineage. Everybody wants data lineage to understand this stuff. Perfect. Ultimately, what we really want to go do is kind of understand, reverse engineer what's going on in that code. And when I reverse engineer, it's not just about, oh, this column came to data here in this column and that column, and it ended up in here. Like, that's the syntax. Oh, I could see that, the flow of that stuff. What does it mean? This column actually means revenue, and revenue is calculated by taking the column over here, which is grand total. It's subtracting this column over here, which is discount, and this other one here. Oh, so the result here, revenue, is this number that was calculated by some formula, which is how we figure out how much money we're making. It's like, that's the meaning, and that meaning is embedded right now in a bunch of code. It can be in your application. It can be in your store procedures. It can be in your queries. It's now being all over all the DBT models people are writing, in your SQL queries, in your views. It's embedded in your LookML. It's embedded in your analytics and your dashboards, on your freaking macros and your spreadsheets. That's where that knowledge is, and that stuff is just getting lost. And then people leave out the door, and we're like, so where does that number match? When people say, there's all these t-shirts you see around people, I'm like, oh, the numbers don't match. Really, what you really should be caring about is, what does that actually mean about it? And that's the semantics, and that's what we should be thinking about, not just, oh, it came from this table and this table. It's like, that's just the syntax. Like, I can see that flow. This is the shift that I don't know. Does this make sense? I'm just rambling here. I'm going to shut up.
No, I think it totally does. What are your thoughts on this, though? Like, how do we connect the dots between the technology tools, like the lineage tools that say, okay, this piece of data came from, 10 different systems, and we were sucking it in, and it got processed in 5 different stages. How do you connect the dots from that to the more organizational knowledge, to the people part of things? Because I feel like that's the key challenge, right? It's like a really, really hard problem.
Well, this is all human generated data, right?
Mm-hmm.
So...
yeah, it's sort of the intersection between the knowledge that you can't really get unless people provide it, whether through their actions or through explicitly providing it, right? And things that are like an example of this, that is kind of a dirty word, right, is documentation.
Yes. Documentation is good.
But then how do you get people I mean, it is a dirty word, and it's a word that I think scares a lot of people, because it's like, one, it's documentation. That I think people just have an allergic reaction to that. It's like seeing a cockroach or a rat. You're just like, oh, no offense to people that like those things. But at a minimum too, it's like, oh, cool. So now you're making me do a lot of extra work. I have to document stuff. Here's what we're doing. Recently we're actually, we're growing, and one thing we're doing is actually writing standard operating procedures for everything that we do. Because what Matt and I have realized is, in order for us to grow, in order for us to hire people, guess what you need to do? You need to give them an instruction on how to do stuff. It's profound, I know. Handing off jobs, but we're documenting. We're documenting processes. We're making videos. We're documenting how things work. This is knowledge, by the way. That now this is very canonical stuff. Like, this is how the business works. This is how we do things. We've realized early on, like, if you frame it in such a way that, hey, do you want to keep doing this job or not? If you don't, figure out how you're going to document and hand it off to somebody. And that was our incentive for documenting stuff. And I think it's that works. But at the same time, if you just come to somebody and say, yeah, I need to just document your data, and it's like, cool, 2 of the most boring things in the universe, now you're making me do that. Cool, thank you very much. I'm probably not going to get around.
Well, we document our code, right? You have to go.
Do we?
Actually, I haven't written code in a long time. You should. Well, I mean,
you should be.
Well,
Some people are. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, right? It's a hard question. Right. How do you tap into it? And I don't think. I mean, why hasn't this been solved yet? Because it's a hard problem. How do you make it easy? Can you make it easier? Can you?
This is the question, right? Yeah. I think it comes down to incentives and outcomes, because it's like
it's incentives.
Mm-hmm.
It's
incentives. Like, Matt and I have an incentive because we're tired of doing a bunch of stuff, and same with the rest of our team, right? Yep. But like, if you need to incentivize people, to do a lot of this stuff. I mean, it's high impact. That's a crazy thing. Right. It's not like this is just like a waste of time, but most people, again, like, documenting your code, so I if we sometimes ask CIOs and CTOs like, okay, so how do you get teams to do stuff? And it's like it's carrots and sticks, right? The stick is a short-term way of doing stuff. It'll work. It's going to come at but nothing's free in this world. It's going to come at the expense of morale and probably a few people on your team. So
and part of this is, what are you measuring, right? Like, even like going back to the software analogy, right? You'd mentioned like commenting in your code, right? When people look at the velocity of a software development team, how often are you just looking at like, well, did you write the code, right? And did the code get pushed to production? And like, obviously you're looking at that, and you look at maybe like the testing. Did you test it, right? But like, are you looking at how much time is being spent on documentation? And do you see that as a tax? Like what if the sprint team told you that, hey, we developed a bunch of features last sprint. We spent 40% of the time building features, and we spent 60% of the time writing documentation. Probably people will be like, what? Why are we wasting so much time writing documentation? But why are we reacting that way? Maybe that's really, and this is where we get a little bit into a cultural issue, is that we think about knowledge and data, like data is the important piece.
So couple things. One is an example of agree with the carrot and stick and incentives. One of the folks we work with, the company called Prologis, right? They're a big warehouse, right? If you buy anything on Amazon, 80% chance it goes through a Prologis warehouse around the world. They're focusing on like data quality and documenting what things mean stuff. So they actually have a mandate, CEO mandate on quality of data. We need to have high quality of data. Cool. And you know how they're managing this? They're saying 20% of your bonus is tied to data quality. You work your boots on the ground in the warehouse. 20% of your money of your bonus is tied to data quality. And okay, that's how do you enforce this? What is it? So they have very specific use cases. It started with something very simple. What is the height of a building? So if in my database I don't have the height of the building is missing, so what? Well, if I don't know what the height of a building for a warehouse company who's storing boxes and stuff, if I have missing the wrong number, I could have put more boxes. I could have charged more money. If I had the wrong one and I've said I can store more boxes, but I can't, then I'm going to get into trouble, right? So they tied it directly to revenue of the company. So there's like, so I'm going to put this extra work, means that we're going to make more money, great incentive, and by the way, you're going to get your bonus. So then it's a cultural shift that they get, and you start learning. Oh, we need to start caring about this, right? And that culture comes around. So I think that's an awesome, amazing kind of story that I heard. And when I tell this to the people really can't believe. What do you mean? You tied data quality to the bonus of everybody in the company? Yeah, they did, and that's a big cultural shift around it. But if we zoom out, this goes into this what I call this balance between efficiency and resilience. A brilliant presentation by Professor Moshe Vardi, a very famous computer scientist. Look it up, called Efficiency versus Resilience. And he's showing he gave this talk at the beginning of the pandemic, and he's like, why did we run out of toilet paper when the pandemic started? Because we had a very efficient supply in time. But then something comes around and like, boom, we ran out of toilet paper. So it was not resilient. You look at the Suez Canal, very efficient. All these ships go through it. The economy of the world blooms because all this stuff can go. But a ship goes like this, and the economy goes kaput in the entire world. Efficient, but not resilient. So I think we need to look at what are we doing and how we're being incentivized. Is it for efficiency or is it for resilience? And the problem is that we're incentivized to be efficient, do things fast, quick wins. People jump from jobs every 2 years, so they have no incentive to be resilient, think about something from a longer term. And I think I think a lot of our struggles that we have right now is because we just focus on being efficient. I think we need to start thinking about being resilient. And we work with a lot of customers who are centuries old. One of our other customers I love, this is Vopak. They're a Dutch company, an oil and shipping company. They've been in business for 400 years. I spoke with the CIO. He's like, Juan, I need to make sure that our business is around for another 400 years. That's a totally different mindset when you start thinking about information technology, data, and systems.
But the interesting thing with efficiency and resilience is, unlike the I would say the atomic examples you give, things that happen in the atomic world, ships getting stuck or toilet paper running out, is knowledge is well, for us it's bits and bytes, right? So it's ephemeral in a lot of ways. So you don't have the supply chain bottlenecks that you would in the real world, and so it's I would argue that the incentives for efficiency are misaligned, right? Where like you can be, I would say we should be as efficient as possible, but it depends on what the business defines as efficiency. And so if a business is only incentivized to work, quarter to quarter in order to goose its earnings, and that's the kind of stuff you're going to see, and that's what happened with with supply chains, for example, right? It's like we're going to squeeze every bit of just in time out of this. And just in time, I mean, I've been a big proponent of domestic manufacturing for this reason, because I have a background in supply chain and operations, and I know what happens when you make things domestically versus overseas. And well, do you want a big weight on the ocean or not?
Well, not to mention like political risk, which we're seeing more and more, right? If you're just stuck in short-term thinking, it's like, all right, things are fine with Russia today. We're just going to assume they're going to be fine for the next 20
we'll get
years.
all of our energy from them.
From them, and
not
then
to pick on certain countries, but but with businesses though, I would say like I'm a huge fan of efficiency, and in fact, if you look at like the essence of lean or DevOps and whatnot, it is to become more efficient with what you're doing, but it needs to be aligned with what the company's goals are too. And if the company's goals are, well, we're just here to maximize shareholder value over the next 2 weeks, and it's like efficiency is going to be geared towards that that outcome, but I would think that data teams should strive for, because you're dealing with bits and bytes that moves instantaneously like that. But at the same time, like, the argument for resilience is interesting too, because there does need to be a sense of robustness, resilience with data and practices as well, where it could withstand shocks.
I got some comments. You go first. I got some comments.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, which is that like efficiency is all about like time frame. Like what's the frame of what you're looking? So like if you're looking at like, hey, somebody just asked me for a report, and the time frame is 24 hours. Well, shoot, I'm just gonna make a one-off report for them, and I'm gonna just do whatever I can to give them the info they need. And then 3 weeks later, they ask me, oh, by the way, I sent that to our CFO, and it's going into our annual report. But one of the numbers feels kind of fishy. It's like, oh shoot, maybe I should have taken the extra 72 hours to actually make sure that I followed the semantics and maybe even encoded it in the warehouse. And it's like, oh, cool. Well, efficiency in the 24-hour time span was the ad hoc report, but the efficiency in the 1 week time span is something very different. And so
then I got to ask also what the metric your CFO is complaining about, whether it was actually wrong or whether he wants to goose the numbers. I'm joking, of course, but
no, this is true though.
Intentionality or not, right?
Yeah. Well, then that's another short-term business incentives problem. I mean, one thing we've seen with the pandemic is all these businesses freaking out about their numbers going down. It's like, well, I mean, if your numbers got really, really juiced by the pandemic, it was kind of predictable that they might go down as the economy shifted back to its normal mode. And so again, the question is, are your incentives just about like the next 6 months, or are they about the next 10 years?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a certain data company where, some of the execs that had been there for months or not even a year had cashed out $32 million in stock options and stuff and like that, I mean, so again, it's, I don't know, anyway, on a rant, but
no, it's interesting, right? And I think higher up in the chat, somebody was mentioning about like data should be on your balance sheet. And I think that's an interesting concept also related to incentives, is that if the value of your data is actually a real asset, then it might change the way that organizations think about the right way to manage their data and their knowledge.
Well, I mean, do you see like companies adding data in as like maybe some sort of a goodwill item on their balance sheet?
I think you can. I've been having this discussion for a while on with Mohammed Osser. He was a former chief data officer at McKinsey. Now he's at Domo. I put you in contact. You guys should meet with him, because he goes a lot to Salt Lake. But have a chargeback model for data products. So you're like, okay, everybody wants. I know this data. This is the domain that I'm in. I'm like, oh, you want these requirements? I'm gonna get a bunch of stuff. It's like, well, actually, let me go start charging. Let's give me some of your budget in here. Like, and then like, well, guess what? I'm focusing on your on this teams. I can't do that teams because they're paying me to go do this. Actually, I'm getting budget from them. And they're like, well, that's, I think, an approach that we're going to start thinking about more. So I think a chargeback model. And then on the whole efficiency and resilience, I think if we focus just on efficiency, and so we start creating these silos of answers. Silos of data. Like, I got a question. Here's your answer. Got a question. Here's your answer. Here's your answer. Keep going. So the way you got that answer, well, you're probably reinventing the wheel. You're probably reinventing it incorrectly. What if we actually spend some time to figure out what is the strong foundations around these things? And those foundations, I think that's where the knowledge comes in. So the example I always give is like, I need to know give me a metric and give me an analysis about real active customers, real active users. Here it is. Okay. And then somebody has another thing that extends it. Okay, here it is. Like, they're probably even copying and pasting the SQL code or the DBT model to go do that stuff. And then they just generated that. No, but if you think about it, and I think this is where the semantics come in, the knowledge layer comes in. So you should not be thinking about it as real active users. There is a notion, a concept called a user. There's a concept called an activity. And the activities are based on all these different features. So let's model that and let's get the data for that. And then when you say, what are the real active users? Oh, so that means, how do I do that? I just need to go combine, join, right? Integrate. A user does these activities, and activities greater than 10 are going to be real active users, whatever, or these types of features. Go do that. And if I looked at the model that I had there, I can then answer a bunch of questions just about users. I can answer a bunch of questions around activities and features that they're in there, plus any combination of that. So by spending that time of defining the model, the semantics, the knowledge around users and activity, I'm not just answering that one question that was asked. I can answer N more questions. And I think that's the scalability around that. So I probably invested a little bit more time to figure that out, but then I can answer just much more questions instead of being efficient. And I just answered this one question. So you ends up being a one-to-one model versus you want to do a one-to-many model. And that's where the knowledge comes in. And what makes that hard is that you got to go talk to people. You got to go figure this out. And
God forbid, jeez.
And so humans are complicated. Ugh, got to talk to humans.
Not on social
media.
How we
started out. Like, talk to humans, you will be successful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the business, gross. We don't need to talk to them.
That's right. I want to just sit and code.
Yeah.
How do you manage the tension? I think this theme is kind of indirectly been coming up quite a bit, actually. How do we manage this tension between decentralization and centralization? So we've talked about data mesh, and then we've also talked about kind of this data commonality concept where you shouldn't have separate parts of the business reinventing the wheel and kind of redoing the same calculations again and again. How do we manage that tension between, having centralized metrics and centralized data teams versus the data mesh and separateness of managing data across teams?
So I got thoughts. You want to?
You start, and then I'll add, because yeah, you start.
So there's not just one water bottle on Amazon.
Yeah.
There's probably hundreds, if not thousands, of water bottles, right? So it's like, shouldn't there just be one? No, there's multiple because it caters to different users, and hence how they're marketing these things. So I think it's that same type of mentality. You want to go, and then it goes back to like being an ambassador and promote, have the marketing around it. So if you're generating the data, you want people to go use it. And if you're incentivized to make sure that, my data is the best and I'm getting rewarded for it because people are using it, then you have the incentives to document it better, right? Which water bottle are you going to go buy? The one that has no information about it, just one picture, low stars, and one that has most stars. It's obvious, right? So those are the types of that's what product thinking brings into. And I think that, and that's how you go deal with the centralization, decentralization. You give incentives to people to say, I just want to I want to be the best. And I want my data to be best for these use cases and give them the mechanisms. That's where technology comes in, right? Give them the mechanisms to go deal with that. Have the best documentation around that, get that searchable and findable and all that stuff. And then, people always, you're going to duplicate data. That's horrible. It's like, the world is complex. Of course, there's going to be duplication. We can't avoid that, because if we start avoiding that, people are going to still do it behind. That's why you have the back office, the shadow ITs. It's still going to happen. So how about we just enable it, right? Embrace that complexity, and then let the social world right there figure it out. And heck, that's how. Reviews and search and stuff. All right, that was my take.
I agree with a lot of that, and I think the only thing I'll add is a little bit of a framework, which is to say, like the business, the parts of the business that does their function. The marketing team knows marketing. The finance team knows finance. And we just talked a lot today about how important business understanding and acumen is to being effective in sort of putting data to work, right? And making the most value out of the data. So in general, I think you should always think, can we start with decentralization and then convince ourselves why something should be centralized, as opposed to the other way around, which I think is the default mode of operation. No?
There may be some things you need to start centralized, right? I mean, for regulatory purposes,
but I'm saying start with decentralization and then convince yourself what needs to be centralized, right? Okay, well, we're subject to GDPR. That better be centralized. Okay. We're a really small team and we can't afford having 6 different data teams. Well, then, okay, you have a constraint around finances. That needs to be centralized, right?
Okay. I buy that.
I've heard this idea too. In fact, we had Bill Inman on at one point, and he basically said he's not against data mesh, but he still feels like there should be maybe some kind of data warehousing that draws from those different sources and then provides kind of a standardized interface over the top of it. So a lot of different ideas in the space. I don't know, Joe, what do you think about this?
I don't know. I'm just excited to see where it all goes. Yeah. I mean, I feel like we're just sort of at this interesting inflection point where it seems like there's a lot of ideas that are finally gelling, and I think we're starting to ask the right questions. Yeah. A lot of the right questions are, okay, so like, why have we been talking about this for the last 30 years on and off or more? Right. I talk with Bill about this often too, and it's kind of like I think he's of the opinion it's just a really hard problem to solve. Like you're dealing with human nature at this point, and just inquisitiveness. Why do we have philosophers, for example? It's because understanding human knowledge is an incredibly hard thing, and the nuances of it. But cataloging knowledge in organizations, I think the big difference between now and I would say that back in the day, when Bill was coming up, and in fact back in the 60s and 50s when data was just you had data systems for the first time, right? The ability to capture data. It's just now, I think we're realizing it's really important for businesses, and it's sort of the cornerstone of a lot of stuff. And so now, a lot of these existential questions are being asked, whereas before these were kind of like, yeah, why are you wasting our time talking about this? Like, get back to work right now and working your Excel reports. That I don't know what they do, but just do them. So, but this is actually when I got into data back in the day, it was like data wasn't what it is now. Like this. They always talk about. Have you guys seen that movie Office Space? Like, yeah. So
here in Austin.
Yeah, that's right. So the red stapler guy, right? I mean, that's kind of like who data people were. Oh, we have a cameo appearance by Chris Tabb, by the way, if you want to let him on the show. So
let him crash again.
Yeah,
he's here.
So 1 second, he's been commenting, and he makes cameo appearances in Friday shows. What's that?
Hey guys. It's about a year since our anniversary when I first gatecrashed your show. It may be actually to the day. This might be what I call synchronicity and serendipity. It's just timing, isn't it? So, or a bit of luck. I've been Phil, first time speaking, long time following. Love your post. I'm just sitting here just going, yeah. I was actually on my phone in a restaurant downstairs. I've just come up to my hotel room. That's how keen I was actually to come up here.
Nice.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers.
Cheers.
Where are you at right now, Chris?
I'm actually on holiday. So officially, as from today, I'm on a digital detox. I'm doing really well. I'm actually doing really well on the beer detox as well. So I'm in Lisbon at the moment. So I've been doing a few of these meetups about piecing together the modern data stack, and I've got the defender of the modern data stack, and it's all about this bring back data modeling, which I think where we first met around when I didn't know the spelling was correct. So thank you for the support on that. I'm not too sure if the US are beating the UK on the spelling of followers of that hashtag. We can look later. It's not a war or competition, should we say, but anything that promotes the focus on data modeling. Everything you guys have said is just spot on. I think you actually speak as fast as I do as well. So I was quite impressed that Joe must be thinking, I'm used to this. I've been Chris Tabb trained. So don't worry. Love the passion. It's great.
That's awesome. Hey, Chris,
nice meeting you, Tim, anyway as well.
Yeah. What's your thoughts on the chat so far? Like, what do you
it's been hot, red hot. I mean, we got Milan on there at the moment, with his data crystal ball. We got Andy Wenham, another hardcore data nerd that works with us. So yeah, seeing some familiar faces. And feels like it's been so long since we spoke last time, Joe. Yesterday.
Oh yeah. Right.
So data modeling is a hot topic, and it sounds like the adding knowledge. And I think another guy on the chat that's been saying some really cool stuff is about context as well. Data without context is invaluable. I like to use that's why I did the post about the comment about the data being an asset, and I think not yet where you don't see it being put on the books. I think if you if we stop doing so many failures, maybe they'll actually would see it on the books rather than just for research and development tax credits. So I think we need to steer it the right way, and where we see that an end-to-end pipeline that's providing a business service. It's not just moving data from here to here and reverse ETLing it out. It's an end-to-end pipeline with lineage, with governance, with good data modeling that's providing that value. Right, I'm putting that on my books as an asset because that's worth money. That's my IP. That's my special sauce. That's what the company's about. Otherwise, why are we doing this? I mean, any engineers out there, look, we're doing this to make money as well. We have to pay you very high salaries.
Yes.
All right. We don't do it. We don't do it for fun. We're doing it to make the data world great and also make the money that pays the bills.
So, organizations need to be centric around what are the outcomes, and that outcome how is that outcome generating revenue or saving us money? And then I think what we need to strive towards is to have these data products, or whatever you want to call them. I'm going to call them data products. These should be as directly correlated to that particular outcome. And you say, so such that you could say, what if you did not have that data product? People would say immediately, well, we would have not achieved that outcome. Like, you can be very specific about it. So then you say, well, that outcome generated how much money here? So how much do you attribute it to all the different aspects around it? That's what we should strive for. We should strive to get to that point. And at that point, you can go say, like, holy shit, this data product right here is actually, this is the value of it. And this is what it costs on here.
I now know why you wear that T-shirt.
I have no time for bullshit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, it's good. No, me neither. But I need to get that T-shirt because not everyone knows it yet.
These are what we have exclusive T-shirts we're giving out to our guests and to loyal listeners. So reach out to us to give us feedback on our podcast, and we'll send you a T-shirt.
It's great. Can I have one now?
Cool.
We'll be in touch. We'll be in touch.
We're kind of wrapping up at the top of the hour here. I mean, any last thoughts on knowledge, data, beer? What's that?
I opened up my second beer. I thought you said that this was going to be longer for an hour. So.
Oh crap! Well, we can keep going for a few more minutes.
I've got to get back down to the restaurant before they think I've actually run away without paying the bill.
Yeah, Chris.
All right.
Great show as always. Take care, guys. Bye. Bye.
All right. See ya.
No, but no worries. If we need to wrap up, we're good. So.
Oh no worries. It's cool. But yeah, it's an interesting topic. I mean, kind of, what are your expectations for where this discussion goes on knowledge, maybe over the next couple of years? Or where do you want to drive it? You're the one driving it, actually. So where do you want to take it?
Well, I'll start off from a kind of a little bit of a vendor or technology perspective, which is that Juan talked about like data catalog doesn't feel like it quite hits the mark, right? In terms of a phrase and kind of what it inherently means. And I think
he's very right.
Our big hope is that changes, right? People, I mean, maybe the term doesn't go away, right? But like people need to start thinking differently about people, context, relationships, in addition to just the data. And like our hope is that over the next few years here, people really shift their mindset and start thinking about data and knowledge both together and really think about not just a data first approach to solving problems, but a knowledge first approach. And it's a good time to be a data person because we're at the center of all of this. And we're the ones who are at the center of trying to collect the data, collect the knowledge, and bring it all together and connect it all together. So I think, Chris mentioned about, hey, we're trying to make money. I think it's a good time to be a data person. You're bringing a lot of value to the world, if not just your company.
So I'm writing here some notes here. So I think there's kind of the social and the technical perspective. How I would want this to evolve, and I foresee it. And I'm pushing it towards this way. From a social perspective, I want people to start thinking about knowledge, and the first step for that is think about data modeling. That's it. Like that's why one of my latest LinkedIn posts is like, what are your data modeling tools that you go use? Right. Listen, I'm literally trying to catalog the data modeling tools people are used. And guess what? Which one was the most the one that people responded the most with? Pen and paper, whiteboard. All right. So that I think just get people thinking more about data modeling, because it's considered a tax. It's considered, that I have to go model data, I won't be efficient. I'm like,
it's like saying I have to write code, I won't be efficient, I'm not delivering features on my front end because I have to go write code. It's like, well, I mean, data, it's what you have to do to actually get the data to your system correctly.
So this is kind of the mindset I hope that we're starting to go kind of shift from there. And data modeling, I think there's also kind of new types of roles that will come around this. I mean, we did this in the 90s, in the late 80s and 90s with expert systems, and this before we got into the AI winter. We had knowledge engineers, right? We're extracting knowledge and writing them into code, into rules. Now, for many reasons, we got into the AI winter, right? It was brittle. We did not have methodologies around this stuff during that time. So during the 90s and 2000s, a lot of theory and research was about doing methodologies on how to acquire knowledge. The knowledge acquisition bottleneck was a problem. I think what we're coming back is like, hey, we need to bring back that work that we were doing back in the late 80s and 90s, upgrade it to the technology of today. And it's not just knowledge, it's also bringing in that data together. So it's a data knowledge. Yeah. I think so that's the role, because in the 90s when we were doing that, we were just focusing on creating diagrams. You're just creating the pretty picture. That's not enough. I need to connect this with the data. And now we focus so much on data in the last 20 years. I think now it's time to get the knowledge and the modeling in. So I think just having that mindset, having tools around data modeling, and it's a teaching, learning, right? Be more Socratic, have the therapist type of mentality, right? Ask questions, go why? Let's try to understand, right? How to manage conversation. This is the unicorn type of person who's in the middle, but we need more of these things, and you can go learn this. So I think that's more from the social side. And then from the tech side, at the end of the day, everything is connected. And if you look at an organization, in reality, what we want is an enterprise 360. For me, I'm biased because this is my life. Everything's a graph. So everything is either a node, it exists, or it's related to something else. And when we talk about knowledge graphs, and the knowledge graphs is about integrating data and knowledge at scale. And the application of a knowledge graph is, tell me, it's a X360. Here's a node. Tell me everything about that node that I care about. Right? That's basically the question, right? You search on Google, you search for Austin, you get a bunch of links about Austin. You get the knowledge panel that says, oh, Austin's the capital of Texas. It gives you all this information about this thing called it. So that's the application we want. Now, everything is connected. Now, we don't want it. We can't boil the ocean. So I think what we really need to go do is, how do we start small? Our position, let me be a little bit salesy here, but I'll stop for a second. As a catalog, I believe your catalog should be built on a knowledge graph. What that means is that your first application of a knowledge graph is your metadata 360 graph. Tell me everything about this table, this dashboard, this thing. Like that's the first step. You talk about lineage. Lineage is navigating that graph, right? How this thing moved. That's the first thing. But how do we get to this enterprise 360? You start with your metadata graph, and then there's people involved in here, right? People are teams, there's stewards and that stuff. So then you evolve, your enterprise will go have your metadata, and then we'll have your employee graph, which will be connected. And then then you expand on that. We're hiring, people are leaving the organization. We have all this data that we're managing. Are we hiring the right people? Because people are retiring and we're migrating to the cloud. So do we have all those skills? So you get that in. And then we start to understand the business. And then we realize, hey, these are the questions that people are asking about customers. So let's actually expand the customers, how are related, what are the business, all this stuff gets related. And that's how little by little we'll start expanding. So that's kind of my view of where we would think the knowledge is, that effectively everything is connected. And let's actually start making those connections, making them explicit, such that you can say, tell me everything about this node or this thing. and you have it all connected, and you also know what you don't have, which is important, and how you can keep expanding that.
Where do you think the role of decision science falls into this?
I have nothing to say about that. I don't know.
Okay. It's interesting because it's a, you know, there's kind of this sub branch, you know, called decision science and whatnot. And as far as I can tell, it relates, you know, if there's any decision scientists in the listening, please chime in. But as far as I can tell, it's more about, you know, how do you know, make better decisions in your organization and so forth. And so, you know, but with better knowledge, hopefully that translates into better decisions. I mean, ultimately, that's kind of, you know, the goal of stuff. But yeah, I don't know.
It's interesting.
Economics and probability and.
So I was having this conversation with one of our customers, and he was, because I've been pushing this with a lot of our folks we work with. It's like, think about the catalog as your catalog questions. Like and he was like, but we need data lineage, but what's our business lineage? So you made a decision, or here's an outcome. What was the lineage of that outcome? Oh, this outcome is based on this decision. This decision was made by these people based on these hypotheses that they had. These hypotheses were generated based on this data on this dashboard that they came from these data sets. Like, oh, now we know if that was the right decisions. Who are the people who are making the best decisions, or where are the decisions that I don't know? Like, that's knowledge that we're cataloging right there.
That's interesting. Have you talked to Ollie Hughes from Count? He's got some interesting perspectives on this stuff. Like because he's looking at so he did a survey of like different companies and just kind of understand like how do you make a decision, right? And what he found is, it was interesting. I'm trying and paraphrase from the conversation we had, but it was like real insights and real actionable stuff didn't really happen until you changed how you were doing your analysis. Because what he found is, like, in most cases, dashboards were there to basically represent like the status quo. And it was more sort of exception handling. Like if something is different from what you expect, then you deal with it. But it wasn't until you try to change your analysis. I'm trying to remember our conversation correctly, and while he's listening, great, chime in. But I thought it was really interesting because it was like analytics. I think to kind of paraphrase, it was more, I guess, sort of. I wouldn't want to use the word ceremonial, but it was just sort of there. Like, but it, you know, over time, it's questionable whether or not things like dashboarding adds any value. I think was what his one of his findings was, or at least the way I understood his findings, I should say. So I thought that was really interesting. And you may have seen this yourself when you look at dashboards over time. You're just like, okay, like what's changed? Nothing great.
I guess it is true that you often create a dashboard sort of after you've made a decision. You're like, we should make sure we keep track of this, right? But how often are you looking at dashboard and you're making a decision informed by that dashboard? I mean, I'm sure sometimes, but how often? I don't know. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that I've realized too is, you know, if a dashboard is supposed to answer what or when type questions, you can make a pretty strong argument that really the outcome of that, or the action that you're taking from that, should just be an automation or an alert or something like that. Because if you're just looking at sales by day, it's like, cool, that's nice. And on one hand, it offers you historical context if you're looking at it from the perspective of doing historical analysis and trying to get context. But just on a day-to-day basis, it's like, well, where did the line move for the day? I don't know. You know, and so it's an interesting exercise. And the next time you look at a dashboard, just, you know, maybe keep in the back of your head, like, what am I? Okay, so if something changed, like, what am I going to do about that?
Yeah.
Right. And really, you know, I'm a fan of, you know, automating these types of things, or at least like giving alerts, just for the reason that an analyst really should spend their time focused on like kind of more causal things, such as a how or a why type answer, things that are very indirectly described by the data, but things that are directly described by the data, you know.
Well, and I think this is where knowledge comes in, right? Because knowledge gives you that context around that, the explainability. Yep. Right. If you look at all the research going around on machine learning and all these big neural net models and stuff, and now everybody's talking about explainable AI. How are we doing explainable AI? Is that, oh, we need the knowledge and the context. And this is where all, you look at all the work that's happening right now in deep learning and how to do explainable AI. They're bringing in knowledge graphs to deal with that stuff, and bringing in common sense knowledge, all that stuff. So this is it, right? like lineage. Everybody talks about lineage. Like, oh, this thing broke. I should go in here and go follow the lines. Like, but no, but explain to me why that happened, right? I mean, I don't tell me what. Don't tell me go look at the data. Don't tell me go look at the little viewer there. It's like you should be able to explain to me it's happened because of all these changes and these people, this context around this stuff. I think that's an example of how context, the knowledge makes you better, stronger, more resilient around that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I learned early on from one of my bosses. It was just, okay, so you're going to give me information. Like, tell me what I need to do with this. Just don't plop a bunch of information down on me. Like, I got a lot of things to do. So, your job is to give me recommendations, not just be a report, jockey and, give me a dashboard. It's like, that's nice, except I don't know what to do with this. And that's, for me, that kind of cemented in. No, the other thing was like, but doing it in such a way where you could describe it. Like, so the other thing he would often say is like, if I ask for the time, don't tell me how to make a watch, just tell me the time. So you got to balance that too, where, because the temptation for smart people is to, I'm not saying I'm smart, but the temptation for people who work with data is to, kind of over explain things, but in a way that they kind of talk about how they derived the data versus how they derive the decision and what the decision means. And this is a very subtle but important thing. Talk to a data scientist and they'll talk about, oh yeah, we made this model and here's how we did it. And most of the business, like I could really care less. And when are you going to leave so I can go do something with my time? So
when I review papers, I'm like, and they go into the experiment section and then they talk about the conclusions in the experiment section. All they go do is that they write what happened. So we see that element X went up and then 20% down here. And they're like, okay, you're describing what I can see in the graph and you're describing what's in the table. So what? What are the takeaways around this? Yeah. Right. Yeah. And then one of the big pet peeves I have is when they have a section called conclusions and they summarize. Oh, so in this paper we work, like you summarize it. What am I supposed to conclude? What are the concrete takeaways? And I think, I mean, this happens in academia all the time, but I think this, like, as data professionals,
in business too, right? Like, the dashboard went up 20%, right? It's like, oh, okay.
Well, what are we supposed to go do?
What should we take away from that?
And I think this is just being critical. Be more critical about it, about your work, your life. Be critical about life too. Yeah.
Be critical about your life.
Meanwhile, I'm hanging out with my dog right now, and then I'm kind of like, she doesn't understand any of this.
No.
She's like perfectly happy.
She doesn't care. She doesn't care about data. Life cares about humans.
Yeah. I do acknowledge that. We'll wake up one day. I'm like all this stuff that we do, like, really, I mean, how are we contributing to society? I don't know. I sometimes hope we.
It's kind of like nerd pro wrestling in some ways, So
I mean,
nerd pro wrestling, ESPN 8.
Yeah, like I don't know. My wife's a behavior analyst, and she works with children with autism. Like, oh wow, you're really helping people, right? Yesterday, I was hanging out with some friends who are archaeologists, and they were like, I just came back from this trip in Greeks where we were discovering these things, and I was in Antigua, Guatemala. I was like, oh man, like you guys are really discovering the past and doing like, what was I doing? Spreadsheet, I don't know.
Doing a podcast about knowledge.
Yeah. Solving the world's problems over a beer. So
one podcast at a time.
Yeah. We all do our part.
I think we got to be humble. We got to be humble about what else. I mean, I think a lot of the data teams and folks, right? We feel like we're in such a high horse, like we're amazing and everything. I'm like, nah, calm down.
Yeah.
No, we're not.
Well, cool. Well, we got to pop off.
Yeah,
we got a bunch of contractors at the house right now. I think my wife needs some help. So, but it's great talking to you guys. Looking forward to our show.
It is
discussion Data.World.
It is. You all are going to be on our podcast. Look it up. September 7th. We're going to be live Wednesday, September 7th at 4 p.m. Central.
Mm-hmm. We'll have an honest, no BS conversation about data. Should be fun.
Yeah, let's try and have a. Do you ever have like dishonest, like all BS conversations about data?
You know what? I want to have like just have a pure buzzword.
There we go.
It'll be a Bizarro episode.
Buzzword bingo. Yeah. We'll just play buzzword bingo together.
Yeah.
I want to be able to go have like one of our good friends who works here, Stuart Curver. he's so funny, and how like you can be a stand-up comedian. I would love to go have a conference and just have a stand-up about just, so what's the deal with what, right? And just go have a fun, very geeky, nerdy stand-up that only the people in the room will understand. Everybody else in the world is like, what the heck are you guys talking
data
about?
comedy.
I was gonna say it's kind of the show actually, but if you want the buzzword ones, when's Gartner? Hey, just kidding. So
we're in Gartner next week. I'm in Gartner next week.
Oh, okay.
There we go. All right.
Then
We'll be in
you can go
Gartner.
hang out with them there.
Yeah.
So
Come hang out. We'll play Buzzword Bingo together.
we'll play. We're live, so I have to. There's offline. We can talk.
we won't be there. It's fine. Well, cool. Anyway, for people who want to learn more about Data.World or either of you two, how would they do that?
You gotta. We're very specific. We're Data.World. The dot
Data.World. Sorry.
And it's Data.World and
Data.World, and if you go to Data.World/podcasts, you can learn about cataloging cocktails.
Nice.
And
yeah, that's a good domain name, by the way. Congrats on snagging that. I like it. So cool.
It's fun.
All right. Well,
Joe, Matt, thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thanks for your time. Yeah, and this Monday morning data chat coming up. We have Colleen Tartal from Starburst. So she's I think one of the directors of engineering there. So we're gonna get really nerdy and probably super technical. So that'd be fun. There's no Friday show next week because I'm taking time off and gonna be in New York City. So if you're in New York, hit me up. Maybe we can go hang out. Maybe. So we'll see. And then got an action-packed lineup in September for Monday morning data chat, and it's gonna be a lot of fun. So, and we're appearing on some excellent shows like Data.World and coming up in early September. So looking forward to it. Looking forward to again chatting with you guys soon. So
and I'll be in Orlando next week for Gartner, and we'll both be at Big Data London.
Nice. Better go catch up with Chris.
Yep, we'll be there. So I think that's it. And then already in December we'll be in DGIQ. I got stuff in December lined up. We'll be there live over there. So we're gonna be around. So look us up.
Making the rounds. That's awesome.
A pleasure.
Cool. Well, thanks. Yeah, thanks. And thanks to the audience. Great questions. Great everything. So have a great Friday. So
Cheers,
see you guys.
Cheers, everybody.
All right. Cheers. All right. Bye.
Take care.